Imagine this: the very person who ignored your tears, dismissed your pain, made you question your own reality, suddenly realizes they no longer have any power over you. Not because you got revenge. Not because you won an argument. But because you became the one thing they never expected: unavailable. Today, I'm going to show you why the one move they fear most has nothing to do with yelling, exposing them, or making them jealous. It's a psychological shift that can leave even the most manipulative person confronting something they've spent years avoiding: the consequences of losing control. Before we begin, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever apologized over and over, while they never apologized once? Type, "I'm done apologizing," if you're ready to stop carrying the emotional weight of someone else's behavior. And if you're committed to protecting your peace and understanding toxic relationship dynamics, subscribe and join this community. Let's begin. Many people assume that individuals with strong narcissistic traits are primarily searching for love, affection, or emotional closeness. But if you closely observe their patterns over time, a different picture often emerges. What often matters most is maintaining a sense of control over the relationship. Control gives them predictability, reassurance, and the ability to shape interactions in ways that protect their self-image. This doesn't necessarily mean every action is deliberate or malicious. Rather, the need to stay in a position of influence can become so central that genuine mutual connection often takes a back seat. You may notice this dynamic in subtle ways at first. Your opinions might be dismissed, your achievements minimized, or your boundaries challenged whenever they interfere with the other person's preferences. Conversations may become one-sided, with your thoughts interrupted or redirected until the focus returns to them. When disagreements arise, they may insist that their version of events is the only correct one, making you question your own memory or perception. Over time, this repeated pattern can leave you feeling uncertain about your own judgment and increasingly dependent on their approval. As the relationship continues, you may find yourself changing your behavior simply to avoid conflict. You start choosing your words more carefully, anticipating their reactions, and suppressing your own needs to keep the peace. This constant emotional monitoring can become exhausting. Instead of feeling safe enough to be yourself, you begin walking on eggshells, believing that preventing the next argument is somehow your responsibility. The relationship slowly shifts from being a partnership to becoming an emotional balancing act centered on managing someone else's moods. Healthy relationships don't require one person to surrender their identity so the other can feel secure. They allow both people to express opinions, make mistakes, set boundaries, and maintain their individuality without fear of punishment, manipulation, or emotional withdrawal. When control becomes more important than connection, trust gradually erodes, and emotional intimacy becomes difficult to sustain. Recognizing this pattern is powerful because it changes the question from, "How can I make this person love me better?" to, "Why do I feel like I have to earn the respect that should already exist in a healthy relationship?" That shift in perspective is often the first step toward understanding that genuine love is built on empathy, accountability, mutual respect, and emotional safety, not on one person's need to remain in control. One of the biggest reasons unhealthy relationship patterns continue for so long is that emotional reactions can unintentionally reinforce them. People with strong narcissistic traits often pay close attention to how others respond to their words and actions. When they see that criticism, silent treatment, blame, or unpredictable behavior consistently produces strong emotional responses, they learn that these tactics can influence the relationship. This doesn't mean they consciously calculate every interaction, but over time, they may repeat behaviors that help them maintain influence or regain a sense of control. The more emotionally reactive the relationship becomes, the more difficult it is to break free from the cycle. This is why many people find themselves caught in endless arguments that never seem to reach a resolution. You explain your intentions, defend your character, and provide evidence to support your perspective, hoping that if you just say the right thing, the other person will finally understand. Instead, the conversation often shifts away from the original issue. They may deny what happened, change the subject, accuse you of being overly sensitive, or turn themselves into the victim. Before long, you're no longer discussing the problem, you're defending yourself against new accusations. The emotional energy you invest keeps you trapped in a conversation that was never truly about finding a solution. Over time, this constant emotional engagement can become draining. You may cry, plead, apologize for things that weren't your fault, or repeatedly seek reassurance that the relationship can improve. While these reactions are completely understandable, they can also signal that your emotional state is still heavily influenced by the other person's behavior. This often strengthens the unhealthy dynamic because your focus remains on gaining their approval, changing their mind, or convincing them to treat you differently. Meanwhile, your own emotional needs are pushed further into the background. Breaking this cycle doesn't mean becoming cold, cruel, or emotionally numb. It means learning to respond rather than react. Responding involves staying calm, maintaining clear boundaries, and refusing to let every criticism or provocation dictate your emotional state. When you stop feeling obligated to defend yourself against every accusation or chase every disagreement to its conclusion, you begin reclaiming your emotional independence. That shift doesn't guarantee the other person will change, but it does reduce their ability to control your emotional well-being. The less your peace depends on their approval or behavior, the more freedom you gain to make decisions based on your values rather than your fears. One of the most powerful changes a person can make after experiencing a manipulative or emotionally unhealthy relationship is learning the difference between emotional detachment and emotional shutdown. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold, uncaring, or incapable of love. Instead, it means refusing to let another person's behavior dictate your emotional state, self-worth, or decisions. When someone with strong narcissistic traits realizes they can no longer provoke the reactions they once relied on, the unhealthy dynamic often begins to change. The influence they once held starts to weaken because your emotions are no longer available as a tool to control the relationship. Many people mistakenly believe that constantly explaining themselves, defending every decision, or proving their innocence will eventually lead to understanding. In reality, this often keeps them emotionally invested in an endless cycle of conflict. Every argument becomes another opportunity to pull them back into the same familiar pattern. Emotional detachment interrupts that cycle. Instead of reacting immediately to criticism, insults, or guilt trips, you pause before responding. You ask yourself whether the conversation is actually productive or simply another attempt to draw you into emotional chaos. This shift allows you to protect your peace without abandoning your values or your compassion. As you become more emotionally grounded, something important begins to happen. You stop measuring your worth by another person's approval. Their compliments no longer define your confidence, and their criticism no longer destroys it. You begin making decisions based on your own principles instead of constantly asking yourself how they might react. This creates a healthier emotional balance because your identity is no longer tied to keeping someone else satisfied. The relationship loses the emotional leverage it once had over you, simply because your sense of stability now comes from within rather than from external validation. This kind of emotional independence can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you've spent years believing it was your job to fix every disagreement or prevent every conflict. But with time, it becomes one of the strongest forms of self-protection. You learn that not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every argument deserves your participation, and not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. By choosing calm over chaos and self-respect over constant approval seeking, you reclaim the emotional space that manipulation once occupied. Rather than living in reaction to another person's behavior, you begin living according to your own values, boundaries, and inner sense of peace. Healthy boundaries are often misunderstood as walls that push people away, but in reality, they are guidelines that define what you will and will not accept in a relationship. When dealing with someone who has strong narcissistic traits, boundaries become especially important because they shift the focus away from trying to change another person's behavior and toward protecting your own emotional well-being. A boundary is not about controlling someone else or forcing them to act differently. It is about deciding how you will respond when your values, needs, or limits are ignored. This subtle difference is what gives boundaries their strength. They are based on your actions, not on someone else's willingness to cooperate. Many people hesitate to set boundaries because they fear being seen as selfish, unkind, or confrontational. They may have spent years believing that keeping the peace requires endless compromise, even when that compromise comes at the expense of their own mental and emotional health. Unfortunately, individuals who rely on manipulation often interpret a lack of boundaries as permission to continue behaviors that benefit them. If every demand is met, every insult is excused, or every broken promise is forgiven without consequence, there is little motivation for the unhealthy pattern to change. Boundaries interrupt that pattern by making it clear that respect is a requirement, not a reward that must be earned. Setting a boundary can be surprisingly simple, but maintaining it requires consistency. Instead of arguing for hours about why a certain behavior is hurtful, you calmly communicate your limit and follow through with appropriate action if that limit is ignored. For example, you may choose to end a conversation when it becomes verbally abusive, decline to engage in circular arguments, or limit contact if repeated disrespect continues. The purpose is not to punish the other person, but to protect your own emotional stability. Consistency is what gives boundaries credibility. When your actions match your words, you demonstrate that your limits are real rather than negotiable. At first, healthy boundaries may be met with resistance. Someone who has benefited from unlimited access to your time, attention, or emotional energy may react with anger, guilt trips, criticism, or attempts to make you question your decision. These reactions do not necessarily mean your boundary is wrong. In many cases, they simply reflect that the old dynamic is changing. The more consistently you honor your own limits, the more you reinforce the message that mutual respect is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Over time, boundaries help you reclaim your confidence, reduce emotional exhaustion, and remind you that protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of self-respect. Many people believe that the best way to deal with emotional manipulation is to fight harder, explain themselves more clearly, or prove beyond doubt that they are right. While this reaction is understandable, it often leads to more frustration than resolution. In relationships with someone who has strong narcissistic traits, lengthy arguments and emotional confrontations can unintentionally keep the unhealthy dynamic alive. Every attempt to justify yourself may simply create another opportunity for the conversation to be redirected, your feelings to be dismissed, or the focus to shift away from the original issue. This is why silence, when used thoughtfully, and consistency in your actions can become far more effective than seeking revenge or trying to win every disagreement. Choosing silence does not mean accepting mistreatment or pretending that nothing happened. Instead, it means recognizing when further discussion is no longer productive. There comes a point where repeating your perspective, defending your intentions, or responding to every accusation serves little purpose. Some people thrive on conflict because it keeps attention centered on them and allows them to maintain emotional influence over the relationship. By refusing to participate in endless cycles of blame and defensiveness, you remove the emotional energy that keeps those cycles going. Your silence becomes a conscious decision to protect your peace rather than a sign of weakness or surrender. Consistency is equally important because boundaries lose their effectiveness when they change from one day to the next. If you say you will leave a conversation when it becomes disrespectful, but remain after repeated insults, your words and actions send conflicting messages. On the other hand, calmly following through on your decisions builds confidence and reinforces that your limits are genuine. Over time, people learn what behavior you will and will not accept, not because you argued them into understanding, but because your actions remained steady regardless of pressure or emotional manipulation. Revenge may seem satisfying in moments of anger, but it often keeps you emotionally connected to the very person you are trying to move beyond. Planning ways to make someone jealous, embarrassed, or hurt can consume just as much emotional energy as trying to earn their approval. Real healing begins when your focus shifts away from changing them and towards strengthening yourself. Silence paired with consistent boundaries is not about making someone else suffer. It is about refusing to let their behavior dictate your emotional well-being. In the end, the greatest victory is not watching someone else lose control. It is realizing that they no longer have the power to control you. One of the most common misconceptions about people with strong narcissistic traits is that if they appear upset, emotional, or even tearful, it must mean they finally recognize the pain they caused. While that is possible in some situations, it is not something that should be assumed. Emotional displays and genuine remorse are not the same thing. Many people confuse visible distress with accountability, but psychology suggests these are very different experiences. A person may feel deeply hurt by losing admiration, attention, or control without truly understanding or accepting the impact of their behavior on others. This distinction is important because it helps you evaluate actions based on consistent patterns rather than emotional moments. When someone who relies heavily on external validation experiences rejection, criticism, or the loss of influence, their emotional reaction may stem from wounded pride instead of empathy. They may feel embarrassed, frustrated, or fearful because the image they have carefully built is being challenged. This can lead to dramatic displays of emotion, unexpected apologies, or sudden attempts to reconnect. However, these responses do not automatically indicate lasting personal growth. The key question is not whether they appear emotional in the moment, but whether their behavior changes over time. Genuine accountability is measured by consistent actions, not by temporary emotional intensity. This is why it is important to be cautious when interpreting apologies or emotional expressions after a period of conflict. Some people apologize because they sincerely understand the harm they caused and are committed to changing their behavior. Others may apologize because they want to restore the relationship without addressing the underlying issues. In unhealthy relationships, emotional displays can sometimes become another way of regaining influence, especially if they quickly lead the other person to ignore previous patterns of manipulation or disrespect. Looking beyond words and focusing on long-term behavior provides a much clearer picture of whether meaningful change is actually taking place. Understanding the difference between wounded pride and genuine remorse can protect you from becoming trapped in cycles of false hope. Instead of asking whether someone feels bad today, ask whether they consistently demonstrate empathy, respect your boundaries, accept responsibility without excuses, and make lasting changes to how they treat you. These qualities are far more reliable indicators of accountability than tears or emotional speeches. By focusing on observable behavior rather than emotional appearances, you make decisions based on reality instead of wishful thinking. That shift helps you build healthier relationships grounded in trust, respect, and genuine emotional responsibility rather than temporary displays of regret. One of the most profound shifts you can make after experiencing emotional manipulation is realizing that your healing is far more powerful than your revenge. Many people spend months or even years imagining the day the person who hurt them finally understands the damage they caused. They hope for an apology, an admission of guilt, or a moment of regret that somehow makes everything feel worthwhile. While these desires are completely understandable, they often keep you emotionally tied to the past. Your happiness becomes dependent on someone else's realization, and your sense of closure remains in the hands of the very person who caused your pain. True healing begins when you reclaim that power and decide that your recovery no longer depends on their response. As you begin focusing on your own growth, something remarkable starts to happen. You gradually stop checking whether they have changed, whether they miss you, or whether they regret their actions. Instead, your attention shifts toward rebuilding the parts of yourself that were neglected during the relationship. You reconnect with supportive friends, rediscover interests that once brought you joy, establish healthier routines, and learn to trust your own judgment again. Each small step strengthens your confidence and reminds you that your identity exists independently of the relationship. This process may feel slow at first, but every decision that prioritizes your well-being moves you further away from the emotional grip of manipulation. Ironically, genuine healing often has a greater impact on the unhealthy dynamic than any attempt at retaliation. When someone who once relied on your emotional reactions discovers that you are calm, confident, and no longer seeking their approval, the familiar pattern begins to break down. They may notice that their words no longer provoke the same responses, or that their attempts to regain influence are no longer effective. This does not guarantee remorse or lasting change on their part, but it does demonstrate that their ability to control your emotional world has diminished. Your growth becomes a reflection of your resilience rather than a strategy to make someone else feel guilty. The greatest victory is not making another person suffer the way you suffered. It is reaching a place where their opinions, their approval, or their rejection no longer define your self-worth. Healing gives you the freedom to make decisions based on your values instead of your fears. It allows you to build relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. When you invest your energy in becoming healthier, stronger, and more emotionally secure, you create a life that is no longer organized around the person who hurt you. That is the kind of transformation no manipulation can undo, and it is one of the most meaningful forms of personal freedom you can achieve. Many people believe that the ultimate goal after leaving a toxic relationship is to make the other person regret everything they have done. They imagine that if the individual who hurt them finally experiences enough pain, justice will somehow be restored. While these feelings are understandable, they can quietly keep you emotionally connected to the past. When your primary focus becomes making someone else suffer, your thoughts, decisions, and emotions continue to revolve around them. Even though the relationship may have ended, the emotional attachment remains. True freedom begins when your attention shifts away from changing another person and toward creating a healthier, more peaceful life for yourself. The greatest disruption to an unhealthy relationship dynamic is not revenge, dramatic confrontations, or proving that you were right all along. It is becoming emotionally healthy enough that you no longer need validation from the person who once controlled your emotions. This means accepting that you cannot force someone to develop empathy, admit their mistakes, or become the partner you hoped they would be. Instead of waiting for an apology that may never come, you invest your energy in rebuilding your confidence, strengthening your boundaries, and learning to trust yourself again. Every step you take toward emotional independence reduces the influence that the past has over your present. Real victory is measured by the quality of your own life, not by the discomfort of someone who treated you poorly. When you begin sleeping peacefully, making decisions without fear, enjoying your relationships, and feeling comfortable in your own company, you achieve something far more meaningful than revenge. Your happiness is no longer based on whether another person regrets their actions. It comes from knowing that your self-worth is no longer dependent on their approval, attention, or opinions. This kind of emotional freedom cannot be taken away because it is built from within rather than granted by someone else. Choosing peace over revenge does not mean forgetting what happened or pretending the hurt never existed. It means refusing to let painful experiences define the rest of your life. You carry the lessons forward without carrying the emotional burden forever. By focusing on healing instead of retaliation, you create space for healthier relationships, clearer judgment, and a stronger sense of self. In the end, the most powerful response to manipulation is not making someone else miserable. It is living a life where their behavior no longer determines your happiness. That is what real emotional freedom looks like, and it is a victory that lasts long after the conflict has ended. As we come to the end of this discussion, remember one truth that can completely change the way you see toxic relationships. Your greatest strength is not your ability to make someone regret hurting you. It is your ability to stop giving them the power to define your life. People with strong narcissistic traits may react in many different ways when they lose influence. Some may become angry. Some may attempt to pull you back with charm or promises. Others may appear emotional or even express regret. But none of those reactions should become the measure of your healing. The only measure that truly matters is whether you are becoming healthier, stronger, and more emotionally free with each passing day. If there is one lesson to carry with you, let it be this. Stop chasing closure from someone who repeatedly showed you that they were unwilling or unable to provide it. Closure is not a gift another person hands you. It is a decision you make when you choose to stop explaining yourself, stop seeking validation from the wrong people, and stop sacrificing your peace in exchange for temporary moments of hope. Every healthy boundary you set, every calm response you choose, and every act of self-respect you practice is another step toward reclaiming the life that manipulation tried to steal from you. Healing is not about becoming colder. It is about becoming wiser. It is not about trusting no one. It is about learning who deserves your trust. It is not about pretending the pain never happened. It is about refusing to let that pain control your future. The experiences you have survived do not have to become the story that defines you. Instead, they can become the lessons that shape a stronger, more confident, and more emotionally resilient version of yourself. So, from this moment forward, make a promise to yourself. Protect your peace as fiercely as you once protected the relationship. Value your emotional well-being as much as you once valued someone else's approval. Choose self-respect over self-sacrifice, clarity over confusion, and growth over resentment. Because the day you no longer need another person to acknowledge your worth is the day you become truly free. And that freedom is something no manipulator, no matter how skilled, can ever take away from you again. If this message resonated with you, let me know in the comments which insight impacted you the most. And if you're committed to building healthier relationships, stronger boundaries, and lasting emotional resilience, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need to hear these words today. Thank you for watching, take care of yourself, and remember, your peace is your greatest power.